Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very senior and accomplished professional from Melbourne, Australia, Swagata Bapat. Swagata, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Swagata is an executive coach and facilitator with over 30 years experience in the mental health and well-being space. And we're going to talk to you, Swagata, today about mental health and coaching. So let's start with coaching.
Yes.
What made you become a coach?
Well, this is a very interesting story, and I know you're interested in stories. So I started off my career as a clinical mental health professional, and I worked for about 10 or so years clinically with predominantly young people and their families who were experiencing mental health issues, and then moved into sort of more service development roles and eventually into quite a big executive role as a general manager of service development. And at some point early on in my journey in that role, I was talking to my manager and saying, look, I think I'm finding it a little bit tricky with kind of covering the vast kind of breadth of the role. And she suggested a coach that she knew. And, you know, I'd worked in therapeutic counselling and had not experienced coaching, but it was just a bit of a revelation for me. He was an amazing coach that I had, and it was really helpful in that it let me really focus on what my skills and strengths were and come to my own understandings rather than them being the expert. And so that was my first experience that kind of planted the seed. And then I moved into working in another organisation where I was in a senior leadership role around leadership development and organisational development, workforce capacity planning. And during that time, I actually was providing some coaching to a couple of staff working in the diversity and inclusion space, and also getting some of my own coaching because I was looking at what my next step was going to be in my career. So that was also incredibly helpful. And when I finally kind of put my shingles out and decided to work as for my own business as a facilitator and consultant, coaching was just the next space. And so I did training with the Institute of Executive Coaching and Learning, which has been fabulous as well. So that's been kind of a long answer to the story of how I got to coaching.
Great response, thank you. So tell me, based on all your experience in organizational development, human resources, how has this experience impacted or added to your coaching philosophy, your style, and your values?
Yeah, interesting. So I feel like there's a number of things that I bring to my coaching practice. I think one is, even though it's not about my actual work, well, it is about my work. One is about the fact that I'm an Indian woman who has grown up in a predominantly white society and worked in organisations where I've often been one of or the only non-white Anglo-Celtic person in the team or in the leadership group. So it's brought to my coaching a real understanding of, I guess, the things that you don't necessarily see. So the reality of what it's like to be someone who is not well represented amongst your colleagues and amongst the workforce in the organisation. And it's helped me be really, I guess, mindful and thoughtful about any of the advice I might give, about any of the questions that I might ask, because I feel like I've got a slightly deeper understanding of what it might mean when you don't have the confidence to express yourself in leadership roles or that's one of the things. I guess the other thing is that I've predominantly worked in mental health services. So I've watched people struggle with mental health issues. I've also seen the impact of things like having limiting beliefs and the impact on confidence, the impact of people with perfectionistic approaches to life and how that might impact on health and well-being, but particularly mental health and well-being. So I guess all of those things, those experiences have brought a particular style to the way that I work. I'm a very insight-oriented coach. And the final thing is probably that this is a little bit of a personal quality as well. I'm probably known for being a pretty straight shooter, so I'm not someone who will talk around an issue. As I've matured, I've learned to be more diplomatic about the way that I talk about things, but I am someone that calls it. So, and I will call it with anyone, regardless of their position. So I think that's another quality. So in my values on my website, one of the things I talk about is that if you're, I'll hold people to account in the coaching. I'll do it in a really gentle and supportive way, but I will hold people to account. So I'm not in there to just kind of smile a lot and tell people that they're doing a great job.
Fantastic.
So,
that's a great learning for me, because I've become a much sharp shooter as I'm getting older.
Yes. You become much clearer as you get older, I think, about what's important and what's not.
Absolutely.
Oh, look, the other final thing I would say is courage. So I guess that courage and bravery thing is linked to often feeling like you don't fit in and often being a bit different. And so what I will always really encourage people that I coach to do is to really take a lot of deep breaths and take a leap of faith and try things out and experiment with them to try and get the results that they want.
Wonderful. So, when I was reading about you, Swagata, on your website, there are a couple of areas that you work on. Mm-hmm. One is you say you work on building strengths, and the second is that you help develop an understanding where people may be stuck and identify clear steps to build leadership skills and confidence.
Yeah.
Could you help me understand the kind of work that you're doing in each of these categories with some examples?
Sure.
Or anecdotes?
So, I'll start with the strengths piece. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things that I have come from, again, a very strong migrant background, and I think this is very prevalent around you really work hard, you critique people in the view that will help them to develop to be better. And for me, I have absolutely loved the absolute opposite of that, which is this strength-based approach that really helps people become clear about what their, zone of genius is, so that when people can identify those strengths, rather than taking a deficit approach of this is something you're not doing well, you need to improve on. Mm-hmm. If you are able to really build people's natural strengths and help them to draw from those strengths to address any challenges they have, it's a much more empowering, often more effortless process for people. So when you think about, what are the times when you're really nailing what you're doing and it seems to come naturally. It's something that people know you for or that you're described for. They're often your strengths when you feel energized and you feel really positive about things that you're doing. And so the first thing is that I notice that not just leaders, just people who are in work and who are really busy often haven't taken the time to think about what their strengths are. And strengths are not skills. For example, I have a real skill in report writing, but it's something that I really don't enjoy. It's not a strength. It's a skill. It's something I can do if I have to. But one of my strengths is listening to people talk and just picking up some of the things that aren't being said. And that's been one of my strengths for many years, and I love it. And it's something that really guides my coaching. So in leadership, what I'll do is I will ask people to maybe think about a time when they're really feeling energized, motivated, inspired, and really drill down into what was it in that situation. Were they up in front of a big group of people telling an inspiring story? Were they sorting out the details of a very difficult system or process? Were they speaking really boldly about something that was an issue in the workplace? And then really exploring that in detail can help to for people to pinpoint, this is one of my real strengths, and this is something that I can keep drawing on.
Oh, wonderful.
So that's kind of what I build in. The other thing that's really important about that is that as a leader, what I'd love to see is, all leaders being able to model that for their teams and then pick what their teams do well and really help build that. And one of the things I talk about is, for example, if you've got a team of people where one person, their real strength is being out in front of lots of people and doing all that PR kind of work, then there's no point trying to get them to sit in the background doing lots of reports. They're the person that you want to really highlight in team events and things like that. You might have someone else who's got a real analytical strength, and so you want to see how you can design their job to meet them being able to use their strengths as much as possible. So,
very interesting. Great response. So one more question relating to coaching before we move to mental health.
Sure.
And this, Swagata, relates to culture. In a multicultural country like Australia, where you made home, culture has a very strong impact on coaching because we all bring our own set of backgrounds, biases, etc., etc. And culture in an organization is an equally important factor. I'd love to get your thoughts on how does organizational culture and personal culture impact your coaching?
Yeah, okay. That's such a great question. And I think it's something that's not considered enough in coaching. And one of the things that I do see is at times coaches not taking enough consideration of what the organizational culture or the person's cultural background might be. And they are such strong influences in what's possible in terms of coaching. And coaching is all about working out what's possible and then taking action. So I guess let's start with the kind of culture in terms of not organization, but in terms of your background. One of the things that I hear often in coaching from people that are not from, the white Anglo-Celtic, majority group is some challenges around how they can bring their whole self to work. So their experiences, their, the way they want to dress, the way they think, the way that they think about their family and their broader community, and how they can safely do that in a space that may not necessarily be set up in that way. Right. One of the things from your own personal culture is that you learn rules, I guess. You learn rules about how things are. Yeah. You might, I know for me, I've learned rules about how to engage with authority. And it took me quite some time in my leadership journey to not automatically defer to authority. That's a very, Indian, Asian thing. And how there was an expectation that I spoke up. So in coaching, someone might come to you and say, I'm having trouble speaking up in meetings. And you could take the approach of talking them through how to build their confidence. If you're not mindful about the fact that they've spent 25 years of their life learning that they have to defer to authority, it's probably not going to make much impact for them in terms of their performance if you can't address those beliefs. So I think for me, it does come back to, in terms of the coaching, thinking about the beliefs that are behind the behaviour and really examining those and offering alternatives to those beliefs.
Well said, well said. Yeah. So Swagata, let's now move to a few questions for you on mental health. That's an area that you mentioned you worked in for some time.
Yeah.
Given today's fast-paced world, us coming out of the pandemic, what are some of the mental health challenges that you have encountered in the areas that you work in?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, I think the pandemic has been such an enormous disruptor for people. And one of the biggest challenges has been the lack of certainty. So dealing with not just one little event of uncertainty, but this ongoing uncertainty. So lockdowns and not knowing if you're in or out, whether you can travel or not. Anxiety, I'm seeing a lot of anxiety in relation to just physical safety. So there was a period of time where people were looking at every day at the COVID numbers and at the number of hospitalizations. And so that level of anxiety. This has been such a disruptive event, I think, that people have lost their sense of footing and their sense of, this sounds really huge, but, what's life about?
Correct.
What's my place in the world? Can I plan for the future, or do I just have to sit in this kind of ongoing limbo? And that's incredibly challenging, particularly if you've come from, as we have in Australia, relatively, reliable, safe kind of environments.
Absolutely.
So I'm seeing a lot of anxiety. I'm seeing, a number of people who have lost their sense of meaning and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And that's incredibly challenging, I think, for your mental health in terms of, having optimism and a sense of purpose, which is really important. I'm also seeing a number of people who are experiencing, pretty significant issues with depression and thoughts of suicide and whether life is worth living. So I do think the impact has been significant across the board. One of the good things that has come out of this, though, I think, is an increased awareness of the fact that anyone can be impacted by mental health issues, and potentially also an increased openness by people in quite senior positions to talk about their own mental health challenges. And again, I think that's incredibly important in terms of modelling and giving the message that it's okay to be open about that.
That's it. And yet, whenever I speak to different people who are from around the world on mental health, one of the things that keeps coming up is that from an organizational perspective and from a family perspective, what are the symptoms one needs to look out for to say a family member or a colleague needs support?
Yeah. And that's a huge question because there are so many different mental health issues that people can experience. But I'll give you some broad things that I think I would be suggesting. The first one is changes. So changes in behaviour. So if you're at work and you've noticed that someone who is usually pretty engaged and chatty and comes out for a coffee, lunch, whatever, who's starting to withdraw and not engage, and that's a change in their behaviour, that would be one of the things that I would be looking out for. At home, if you've got a child who is starting to spend a lot of time isolating in their room, that it could be a whole lot of other things, but that would be something that I would be kind of saying, I'll have a bit of a think and pay a bit more attention to what's going on there. In terms of specific symptoms, if you are noticing changes in sleep, so sleep disturbances, changes in the way that people are presenting, so are they starting to behave in a more irritable way or more angry, more outbursts, more withdrawn, crying a lot more. If there's changes in appetite, so someone who usually had a healthy appetite just not eating anymore. Withdrawal I've talked about, and changes in functioning. So if you notice at work that someone who usually has been really on the ball, really good with detail, and who's starting to miss a lot of basic detail, that might be a sign that there's something else going on. And that could be a sign of a whole lot of things. So it could be a sign of, developing mental health issues. We've had a real focus here in Australia on family violence. It could be a sign that there's something else going on at home, and but it's still another kind of, we need to pay attention thing. Yeah.
There's some great examples you've given, and you're so right in everything that you've said. So one more question on mental health. So, the brain is another organ. I'm happy to say that I'm diabetic, or I've got a heart condition, or I've got any other problem. But all over the world, it's getting better, but we still don't want to talk about depression or any other mental health challenges. From your perspective as an expert, why is this happening, and do you see this changing?
Yeah, well, I'll answer the first bit first. Yes, I see it changing.
Okay.
So when I think about 30 years ago, the stigma was alive and well, to the point that research that was done around mental health professionals who and their attitudes, they were found to be one of the most stigmatized groups of people. So, you know, and I think that is changing. I think it's changing because of, you know, big global campaigns around depression, around anxiety, perhaps not so much around the psychotic spectrum disorders, which is interesting. I think there's still a lot more stigma about those being people who are dangerous, and, you know, that's still a concern. So I think it is changing. I think we continue to build on that change. But there is, absolutely, you're right, there is still a high level of stigma. And some of it, I think, is about just the real impact that can sometimes happen when people, you know, divulge that they've got mental health issues, so that they can be discriminated against. It can have an impact in terms of work, so they may be less likely to be promoted. They may lose jobs if they're in short-term positions because they're seen as more of a risk. You know, people often, I know from some of the work I've just done around stigma and discrimination in culturally diverse groups, people will often not talk about mental health issues because they're seen as being a burden on other people, and they may be more focused on material well-being and making sure that all of the material needs are met and looked after. And I think that piece around stigma and discrimination is incredibly multi-layered and it's really complex. But at its heart, I think, is people not feeling safe to divulge or to talk about their issues because they're not clear about the response that they'll get.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well said. So my last question to you, Swagata, and this is for the many, many young people and others who listen to our conversation. What would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from our conversation today?
Very good question. 3 lessons. The first one, I think, would be to be brave and have courage. So, you know, the last 2 years has shown us this, but life can be pretty tough, you know, even though what we see on social media is this glossed up version. I mean, life is full of lots of challenges. And I think my first piece of advice would be to really take heart, have courage, and be brave and try things out. That's been definitely something that's guided me through my work and my personal life.
Yeah.
The second thing would be to really try hard every day to take some time to just be with yourself. And, you know, you talked at the start of this conversation about how increasingly busy life is.
Yeah.
And I think that we have lost, as human beings, that opportunity that's so important to our well-being to just sit with ourselves. And, you know, one of the things I try and do in leadership coaching is encourage the leaders that I work with to, even if it's 10 minutes in the day, to just sit quietly, everything turned off, no one talking to you, and just breathing and noticing the thoughts that are coming up can be incredibly helpful. And the third lesson I would take is be kind to yourself. And I think it's really easy. And I mean, I'm assuming that we've got a really broad audience for this, but there's definitely something in the Asian-driven culture, from my experience, that can be about kind of critiquing and moving forward. And so I think there's something really lovely about the idea of being a good friend to yourself, being kind to yourself, giving yourself a break and not expecting yourself to be 100% perfect 100% of the time. That just gives you a bit of space.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What amazing lessons. And Swagata, on that note of be brave and have courage, try things out, be with yourself or find me time. And the third one, be kind to yourself. Thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about your journey as a coach, as your journey as a mental health expert. Thank you for giving me such amazing examples of all the work that you're doing. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been really lovely.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.